If someone had told me a year ago that a single sentence would completely change the way I looked at my family, I would have laughed. Not because my family was perfect. It wasn't. We were just the kind of family that got really good at pretending everything was fine. My name is Emily. I'm 27 years old, and I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. If you had asked anyone who knew us, they would have said my parents had built a successful construction company from the ground up. They would have told you my dad was respected, my mom handled client relationships better than anyone, and my older brother, Jason, was practically born to take over the business. Then there was me, the daughter who always seemed to exist just outside the spotlight. I wasn't the rebellious child. I wasn't lazy. I didn't get into trouble. I graduated college, came back home, and spent 5 years working for the family company because I honestly believed hard work would eventually matter more than favoritism. It didn't. Jason could miss meetings because he overslept. Dad would laugh. He works hard. He deserves a break. If I arrived 5 minutes late because of traffic, Dad would glance at his watch. Professional people leave earlier. Jason landed a new client. We celebrated with dinner. I landed a new client worth almost the same amount. Dad nodded once. Good. Keep it up. That was it. At first I thought I imagined the difference. Then I stopped questioning it. Eventually, it became normal. Mom always tried to smooth things over. Your father just relates to Jason differently. He doesn't mean anything by it. Don't compare yourself. Those sentences became background noise. The only person who ever looked at me like I mattered was my grandmother. Grandma Evelyn never ignored my accomplishments. She remembered every promotion, every birthday, every small victory. When I redesigned one of the company's project management systems, she brought me my favorite chocolate pie because she said hard work deserved to be celebrated. When Jason closed a deal the following month, Dad bought him a new truck. Grandma leaned over during dinner and whispered with a smile, "I think my pie was the better investment." She always knew how to make me laugh. Then she got sick. At first, everyone insisted it wasn't serious. It'll be okay. She's tough. She's beaten worse. Until one afternoon, Dad called everyone together. The room was silent before he even spoke. Nobody wanted to hear the words that eventually came. Grandma was gone. The funeral took place 3 days later under a gray Ohio sky that looked as exhausted as all of us felt. People filled the church. Former employees, friends, neighbors, contractors who had known my grandmother for decades. Listening to them tell stories about her, I realized something I should have noticed years earlier. Every single person talked about her leadership, not just her kindness. One retired employee smiled through tears. Your grandmother built opportunities for people. Another man shook my hand. I wouldn't have my house if it wasn't for Evelyn. Someone else said, she was the backbone of that company. That sentence stayed with me. Backbone. Growing up, I'd always heard Dad talk as though he'd created everything himself. Hearing so many people speak about Grandma made me wonder how much of the story I actually knew. Still, it wasn't the time for questions. After the service, people gathered outside in small groups. Jason stood surrounded by employees, accepting condolences like he already represented the company. Dad stayed close beside him. Every introduction sounded almost identical. This is my son Jason. Our future president. Our next leader. I stood 20 feet away talking with one of Grandma's friends. Dad never once called me over. It shouldn't have hurt. I'd spent years pretending those moments didn't matter. But grief has a way of stripping away every defense you've built. By late afternoon, we returned to company headquarters. Most people assumed we were there to organize flowers, paperwork, and messages from clients. Instead, Dad asked me to come into his office. Just me. For one brief moment, I thought maybe this was finally different. Maybe losing Grandma had reminded him that life was too short. Maybe he wanted to tell me he appreciated everything I'd done. Maybe. I should have known better. His office looked exactly the same as it always had. Dark wood desk, awards covering the walls, blueprints framed like artwork. Jason was already sitting in one of the leather chairs. Mom stood near the window, unusually quiet. Nobody smiled when I walked in. Dad folded his hands. "Close the door." I did. He slid a folder across the desk. "There are some documents inside." I looked at him. "What kind of documents?" "Read them." I opened the folder. The first page was from the company's attorney. The second referenced organizational restructuring. The third included signature lines. My name was already printed at the bottom. I frowned. "What is this?" Dad answered without hesitation. "We're reorganizing leadership." I kept reading. Then I saw it. Effective immediately, my management responsibilities would end. My shares in future executive planning would be relinquished. Jason would assume sole operational authority. I looked back up. "I'm being removed?" Dad nodded once. "It makes the most sense." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain refused to believe what I was reading. "I've worked here for 5 years. You've been paid. I've helped build half the systems we're using. And we're grateful." Grateful. The word sounded empty. I turned another page. "There's nothing here about another position." "There isn't one." "What do you mean?" Dad leaned back. "Jason is going to lead this company." "I know that was always the plan." "No." His voice became colder. "Jason is the future of this business." "And me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Jason. Jason avoided my eyes. Then Dad looked back at me. "You were never really part of this company." The room became perfectly still. I honestly wondered if I'd heard him wrong. "What? You heard me. I've worked here every day." "You worked here." Past tense. "As of today, you're done." Mom finally spoke. "Maybe we should discuss this another way." Dad raised one hand without looking at her. "It's already been decided." I stared at Jason. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Did you know?" His silence answered before he did. "Yes." Something inside me cracked. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like glass, developing a fracture nobody notices until it finally gives way. I looked around the office I'd spent years treating like a second home. The late nights. The weekends. Missing birthdays, because projects needed finishing. Driving across the state to solve problems nobody else wanted. All of it suddenly felt disposable. Dad pushed a pen toward me. "Sign the papers." I looked at the pen, then at the signature line, then back at him. "I don't think I can." His expression hardened. "You don't have much choice." Maybe 6 months earlier I would have argued. I would have cried. I would have begged him to explain. Instead, I quietly closed the folder. "I need some air." Dad sighed with obvious disappointment. "Emily." I picked up the folder. "I said I need some air." Without waiting for permission, I walked out of his office. Nobody followed me. Not Mom, not Jason, not even Dad. I reached my car before the tears finally came. I didn't sob. I just sat behind the steering wheel staring through the windshield while everything replayed inside my head. "You were never really part of this company." I repeated it over and over, trying to understand how someone could erase years of loyalty with a single sentence. By the time I got home, it was almost dark. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse beside the couch, and ignored the dozens of sympathy messages people had sent after Grandma's funeral. The apartment felt painfully quiet. I made tea I never drank, turned on the television I never watched, mostly because I didn't want to sit alone with my thoughts. Around 9 that night, my laptop chimed. One new email. At first I almost ignored it, then I noticed the sender. Evelyn Carter, my grandmother. I froze. For a second, I actually forgot she was gone. Then I noticed the small line beneath the subject. Scheduled message. The subject read, "Emily, there is something your father never told you." My heart started pounding. With trembling hands, I clicked it open. I opened the email, expecting one last sentimental message. Maybe a goodbye, maybe something about family, maybe advice she never had the chance to give me in person. Instead, the first sentence made me sit up so quickly, that I almost knocked my mug off the coffee table. My sweet Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry for the pain you're carrying today. I know your father. I know the decision he was always going to make after I was no longer here. That is why I waited, until now. I read the paragraph twice. Then a third time. My grandmother had known something. Not guessed. Known. I kept scrolling. There is something your father never told you. Before you confront anyone, read everything I've attached. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Let the truth speak for itself. Below the message were 4 attachments: a scanned legal agreement, a certificate of incorporation, several notarized letters, and a folder simply labeled Company History. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The construction company had been part of my family's identity for as long as I could remember. Dad always told the same story. He had started with an old pickup truck, a toolbox, and a dream. He had built the company from nothing. I'd heard that story at family dinners, company anniversaries, and every employee appreciation event. It was practically family history. I opened the first document. Across the top were the words, Articles of Incorporation. Below them was a date from more than 30 years earlier. Then I saw the name of the original founder, Evelyn Carter, my grandmother. I frowned. Maybe Dad had bought the company later. That would explain it. I opened the second document. It contained corporate records showing my grandmother as the sole owner during the company's earliest years. The third attachment showed amendments over time. Each page had signatures, dates, notary seals. Everything looked official. My pulse began to race. This can't be right. I whispered the words to my empty apartment. I opened the folder labeled Company History. Inside was another letter from Grandma. Your father worked harder than almost anyone I've ever known. He helped this company grow into something I could never have imagined, and for that I will always be grateful. But the company was never his to give away. That distinction matters. I leaned back in my chair. Every sentence seemed to raise another question instead of answering one. Why hadn't anyone ever told me this? Why had Dad always described himself as the founder? And why had Grandma waited until after her death to tell me? I continued reading. Years ago, I made a decision that I told almost no one about. I hoped I would eventually be able to explain it in person. Life didn't give me that chance. I clicked open the next attachment. It was longer than the others. Halfway down the page, I stopped breathing. The heading read, Transfer of Ownership Interest. My eyes scanned the document once, then again, slower. The recipient's name appeared in bold. Emily Carter. Me. No. I shook my head. There has to be some mistake. I checked the date. It had been signed years earlier. Long before my grandmother became ill. Long before I'd started working full-time for the company. There were witness signatures. A notary seal. Every page appeared complete. I wasn't looking at a draft. I was looking at executed legal documents. I opened the next letter. This one wasn't written like a business record. It sounded like Grandma. Warm. Patient. Calm. If you're reading this, then I wasn't here to explain why I made this decision. Please understand that I never wanted these papers to become a weapon. They were meant to become protection. Protection. The word stayed with me. Protection from what? Or from whom? I kept reading. I knew there might come a day when you would be made to feel small. I prayed I would be wrong. If that day has arrived, don't fight emotionally. Don't try to win the loudest argument in the room. Truth doesn't need to shout. Truth only needs to be seen. I felt tears building again. Not because of the documents, because I could almost hear her voice saying those words. She always believed that patience revealed character. When Jason and I argued as kids, she never rushed to choose sides. She'd simply say, "Give people enough time, Emily. Eventually they'll show you who they are." I never understood what she meant. Now I wondered if she had been talking about much more than childhood arguments. I spent the next 2 hours reading every attachment. There were corporate records, meeting minutes, ownership certificates. Correspondence between attorneys. Most of it was technical, but one thing became impossible to ignore. The ownership transfer wasn't hidden in vague language. It was direct. Grandma had legally transferred controlling ownership to me years earlier. The transfer included conditions and administrative steps that would need to be completed formally, but the intent of the documents was unmistakable. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't misunderstanding it. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. Dad had looked me in the eye that afternoon and told me I wasn't part of the company's future. Yet Grandma's documents suggested she had envisioned something very different. My phone buzzed. It was Mom. I let it ring once before answering. "Hi." Her voice sounded tired. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." I know today was difficult. There was a pause. Then she asked carefully, "Did your father talk to you after the funeral?" So she knew. I looked back at my laptop. "Yes." "I'm sorry." Another silence. Then she quietly added, "Your father believes he's doing what's best." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "Mom, did Grandma start the company?" The silence that followed lasted so long, I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, she answered. "Why are you asking that?" "Just answer me." "I think it's late for this conversation." "Mom, I really don't think." "Please." Her voice became smaller. "Your grandmother was involved in the beginning." "Involved?" "Emily." "Ah, did she found it?" Another pause. "Yes." I closed my eyes. So Dad knew. He knew. And nobody thought I deserved to know? It's complicated. No. My voice remained calm, surprising even me. It isn't. Mom sighed. "I don't know what you've been told." "I haven't been told anything." That was the problem. After we hung up, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, because every memory I'd accepted as truth suddenly felt incomplete. The next morning, I called the law firm whose name appeared on one of Grandma's documents. I didn't demand answers. I simply asked whether someone could verify the authenticity of several records. The receptionist transferred me to an attorney who had worked with my grandmother years earlier. After confirming my identity, he agreed to meet with me that afternoon. I printed every attachment, placed them neatly into a folder, then looked at the family company logo embossed across the cover. For years I'd thought that logo represented my father's dream. Now I wasn't even sure whose dream it had been. As I picked up my car keys, I looked once more at Grandma's final handwritten sentence. "Let the truth speak for itself." I whispered the words under my breath. Then I headed toward the attorney's office, knowing that whatever happened next would determine not only who controlled the company, but whether my family could ever survive the truth. In the months that followed, the legal process came to an end exactly the way Grandma had intended. The ownership transfer was officially recognized, and with every signature, every filing, and every final piece of paperwork, the truth that had been hidden for years finally became impossible to ignore. I became the legal owner of the company, not because I fought harder than anyone else, not because I humiliated my family, because Grandma had trusted me long before I trusted myself. My father stepped away from running the business. It wasn't the dramatic downfall people imagine in stories like this. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no public scenes. He simply accepted that the company was no longer his to control. Jason stayed with the company too, but under the same standards as everyone else. For the first time in his life, his last name wasn't enough. If he wanted to build a future there, he had to earn it. Oddly enough, I think that became the best thing that ever happened to him. As for me, I made one decision before changing anything else. The first conference room I renovated wasn't named after me. It was renamed the Evelyn Carter Room. Every new employee who joined the company would learn who actually started it and the values she built it on. Honesty, hard work, and treating people with respect, regardless of who they were. I wanted her legacy to be remembered for more than a legal document. A few weeks later, my father asked if we could have lunch, just the two of us. For a moment, I almost said no. Then I remembered something Grandma used to tell me. You can protect your peace without closing your heart. So, I went. We sat in a quiet diner neither of us had visited in years. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, my father looked at me and said, I've spent every day since that meeting wondering how many chances I missed to simply tell you I was proud of you. I didn't answer right away, not because I wanted him to suffer, because I honestly didn't know what to say. He continued, I convinced myself I was making practical business decisions. Looking back, I realized I was making personal ones. He looked down at his coffee. And every one of those decisions pushed my daughter further away. For the first time, I didn't see the man who had always chosen Jason. I saw a father who finally understood what those choices had cost him. I can't change the past, he said quietly. No, I replied, you can't. He nodded. But we can decide what happens next. He looked up, surprised. I'm willing to have a relationship with you, I said, but not the old one. He waited. No more favorites. No more pretending my voice matters less. If we're going to be family, it has to be built on honesty. He smiled through tears. I'd like that. So would I. We didn't hug. Not because we hated each other, because some relationships aren't repaired in one emotional moment. They're rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. Later that afternoon, I drove to Grandma Evelyn's grave with fresh flowers. I knelt beside the headstone and rested my hand against the cool stone. You were right, I whispered. The truth didn't need me to scream. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, not revenge, relief. The company was finally where Grandma had always hoped it would be. My family finally knew the truth, and I no longer needed anyone's approval to believe in my own worth. I got back into my car, looked ahead instead of in the rearview mirror, and drove toward the future I had finally chosen for myself. I stopped chasing a place in someone else's story, and finally became the author of my own.